Our next guest is the man behind New Zealand's own City Kickboxing, and guys like Dan Hooker, Alex Volkanovski, Brad Riddell, Shane Young, Kai Kara-France, and of course the man that takes on Paulo Costa, a UFC 253, Israel Adesanya. CKB's very own coach, head coach, of course, Eugene Bareman, is back on Submission Radio. Euge, thanks for taking your time. How are you? And by the way, congratulations on that beard. That is something that Chuck Nolan from Castaway would be very, very proud of.
No, thanks for the intro, guys. The beard I've had since the start, since we locked down here in New Zealand. I've just grown it out, so I might tidy it up a little bit before we leave.
All right, very
tonight.
nice. Very, you'll be looking spiffy when you're in Israel's corner on fight night. Before we get into it, and I know that you've put a lot of effort into setting up this beautiful shot with your phone right now, but we've been dying to get a glimpse of what the gym is looking like with all the people living in it these days. How long has it been, by the way? How long have you guys been living together for so far?
So no, we were together for just under 3 weeks, but just a week ago or something, we were allowed. The level went down to what they call 2.5. Mm-hmm. So it went from 2 to 2.5. Where we were finally allowed back home and we could travel back to the gym. So, yeah. So now we don't have to live in the gym. So we were together for just under 3 weeks.
Because I was going to ask you to give us a gym tour like MTV Crib style, but are you telling me that there's no more beds anymore? You guys aren't living together anymore?
Nah. Our Prime Minister let us open up the gym a little bit better, so now we can have the public coming in, so we were able to operate a little bit normally as a gym. So I had to send all those guys back.
You mentioned how you weren't the happiest with some of the performances, after Alex Volkanovski and Dan Hooker. They were good fights, but you thought, all right, I've got to switch things up here. I believe you said to Combat TV, we all got to live together and move in together. And I'm wondering, what's been the best thing and the worst thing about living under one roof together, especially for so long?
Look, I learned, the funny thing is, as much as you think you are close to someone and you know someone, you don't get to know someone better than if you live within close vicinity of them. And I learned a lot about the guys, and I thought I already knew a lot about them, but being surrounded by them and living with them for 24 hours was, I learned so much about their personality. I learned so much about their habits in between trainings, some good, some bad. The worst thing for me, honestly, was obviously I have a young family, so as much as I love the boys, I miss being around my family a little bit. And then, other than that, it was a pretty enjoyable experience.
What is one of the strangest things, or the things that stands out to you the most that you learned about one of your fighters while doing this whole experience?
Look, people that don't, Shane Young hasn't fought for a while in the UFC. It's been 18 months, but he's a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve, puts all his emotions out there and for the world to see. And I learned that he is a very complicated individual. He's a person. He's a very spiritual person. He's a person that does a lot of reflection. And I got to know Shane Young I got to know Shane Young intimately. I saw parts of Shane that I haven't, seen before. And where that helps me is in my coaching of him. So, that's one thing that stands out about what I learned about the fighters.
I love us some Shane Young. We're getting married apparently. Huge. Shane Young proposed while we're interviewing Israel. Just ran in and did it on the spot. So there you go. But I was gonna. I know that you and Israel, you guys roomed together back in China. So I'm just wondering how this compared to that, and if there's any stories you can share from your days rooming with Israel in China. I imagine you would have some wild ones.
Yeah, I mean, we were in room together for years. When we were going through China or everywhere, anywhere we went, all over the world. Back in the days when they only provided one hotel room and sometimes 2 single beds, sometimes 1 bed. So I took the bed, he took the floor. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of what makes us good is we're completely the opposite people. So we don't gel together too well in a living situation. We do all right as a coach and a coach sort of student role, obviously, but we definitely wouldn't live together in close proximity.
Why? What happens when you guys live together?
Look, he's a night owl. Okay, like he likes to stay up very late, and I like to get up very early in the morning. So we're complete opposites in that respect. I also need complete darkness and complete solitude, silence, and he just annoys the shit out of me. He has his laptop going, his phone going, he's eating during the night, and it used to piss me off.
Man, that sounds very familiar to me. You know, I need the darkness as well. Paul Casper's had to share some rough hotel rooms with me as well. And I was gonna say, you I smell a sitcom on my hands. After you guys are done with fighting, it's the Eugene Israel show. I think there's some comedic hilarity there to see as well. But I was gonna mention, you were speaking to Combat TV about a week ago, and you were talking about some of the challenges of actually traveling to UFC 253. And I'm wondering where you guys are at with that, because initially I believe the UFC wanted you guys to fly to the US and be in Las Vegas and then go from Las Vegas over there to the Emirates. And now I'm wondering if the 2.5 changes things for you guys and improves your pathway to making it to the fights, maybe reduces some of the flight time.
Well, we're actually leaving tonight. So we're leaving tonight. 2.5 in New Zealand hasn't affected it greatly, but what's happening is a lot of the places that we transit through are shutting down to get to Abu Dhabi. So we're running out of routes to Abu Dhabi. So what they've done is they're flying us to Vegas to catch the chartered flight with the staff and the rest of the fighters, which is happening. But they want us to get to Vegas as soon as possible so that we can do a 48-hour quarantine and get tested before we hop on that plane. So we're actually leaving tonight. So normally we leave a week before the fight, like for Alex's fight, we left a week before, but now we're leaving 2 weeks before. That's the only thing that's changed. And the flights are a bit all over the place, but we just have to work with it. We're going to LA, and then somehow we're flying up to San Francisco, and then back down to Vegas, and then obviously quarantine, and then Abu Dhabi. So it's just the nature of how the world is now. You just gotta adapt, and that's what we're doing.
It's going to be quite the adventure, and of course, there's just so many things on the line here. You guys obviously make up the most exciting and also the majority part of the card. I'm just wondering, has the UFC spoken to you guys about any backup options in case anything happens to Paulo Costa leading into this fight, or as far as you're aware, is he the only guy and the only option come UFC 253?
Yeah, I think if he doesn't make weight, I think Israel just jumps straight into the light heavyweight title fight.
As in Dominic Reyes and Jan Blachowicz.
Yeah, he'll take one of their guys' places.
I can never tell if you're serious or not, Huge.
Yeah.
It's that dry Kiwi humor. Is that really going to happen?
The Stipe headline all over again. This is the Stipe headline all over again. We know you well, Huge. But, I mean, in terms of missing weight, of course, but also with COVID around and stuff like that, you just never know which fighters are going to make it through. We know Paulo is traveling all the way from Brazil. In all seriousness, you know, is there a pathway there if for some reason he doesn't make this fight, or is it just one of those?
There's no plan B for this one. They haven't. I believe they haven't put another middleweight fight on there of any 2 top-ranked guys. So they're chucking all their eggs into Paulo Costa making weight and not and obviously not having COVID, which is I mean, those are both pretty high-risk things, being from Brazil and coming through the States. And then I actually think, I don't believe he's had. I believe he's made weight most. Has he ever missed weight? I'm not sure, but I think he makes weight every time.
It's not a concern of yours or anything, is it?
No. I believe he makes weight every time he has to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So it'll be a middleweight title fight. He's not taking poor Jan or Dominic Reyes' spot. Let's talk about Paulo Costa and obviously the challenge at hand, because Israel did speak recently about how guys, in his mind, like Anderson and Whittaker are better strikers than Costa, but he maintains that Costa is still very, very dangerous. In your mind, what makes Costa dangerous? What does he do so well?
Well, they're not necessarily better. They're not necessarily better or Costa's worse. I think he's just very different. What makes him dangerous is he has the power that none of those guys that Israel previously mentioned. He has the power that they didn't have. That's something that Costa has, and I think it's the power that makes him, very dangerous. First and foremost.
I mean, leading into this fight, there's been so much debate about Paulo Costa. A lot of people, guys like Dan Hardy, saying, hey, look, this guy's not on the level compared to any of the other contenders in the division. Then other people sort of popping up and backing up Paulo Costa, saying this guy's got an X factor that a lot of people can't measure, by breaking down fights and looking at previous tapes. Where do you kind of sit on Paulo Costa yourself going into this fight? I know you mentioned that obviously, he brings in, some of those weapons, but is there an X factor there that you see that sort of you guys haven't seen before? I know you've mentioned that you guys have fought a similar blueprint many times before with Israel, in his kickboxing days. So is that a lot of that being transferred over here, or is this a little bit different to what you guys have faced previously?
No, I mean, we can reflect back on a lot of Israel's fights where he's fought guys with big power and guys that were a lot more technically sound than Paulo Costa. But at the end of the day, we haven't fought Paulo Costa, and he seems to be a very powerful striker. And you just the part that you just never know till you're in the cage is how powerful this person is. Like, can Israel deflect his shots? Can Israel move out the way of his shots? That's the part that we never really know until the opening 30 or 40 seconds. And that's sort of always the most nervous time. But I think Israel can mitigate his power. And then what I think will happen is he just doesn't have enough diversity in his striking to stay with Israel during the fight, to stay on equal par with Israel. You can't, if you're just relying on your power, you have nothing to back that up. There's nothing behind that. There's no other plan that intimately. Then it's just not going to be enough. It's not going to be diverse enough to keep up with Israel.
Luke Thomas obviously made some great points about Paulo Costa's stats. He broke it down very well, and about how the amount of strikes he absorbs per minute is around double the average amount. So he's very hittable, but also the amount of strikes he dishes out is actually even more. So he's very much willing to take many, many shots to give many, many shots. What do you make of sort of those numbers and the fact that he just takes so many shots and just keeps coming forward?
Yeah, I mean, you can immediately, you can immediately understand that he's a guy that you have to accumulate damage on. He's not a guy that obviously, falls with one punch. He's got very good resistance against punch. He can take a lot of damage. So he's a guy that you have to make a game plan that reflects that. Your game plan has to be to break this fighter down over a long period of time instead of looking to get him out of there fast. So, that's the obvious thing regarding that.
When people are previewing this fight and looking at what might happen, I see two scenarios that people bring up most of the time. The first one is, Costa just gets out there in the first round and tries to rush Israel, tries to land those strikes and tries to do what he's done in previous fights. The other scenario that a couple of people have brought up that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on as well is, maybe Paulo Costa trying to surprise a lot of people and holding back in that first round, maybe the first couple of rounds, and trying to sort of work off that last Yoel Romero fight, maybe hoping that Israel engages with him and then sort of saving himself for the later rounds because he hasn't really had those 5-round battles before. I'm just curious, what kind of Paulo Costa do you think we'll see in that octagon? Do you believe we'll see a more constrained Paulo Costa that saves that flurry for later on? Or do you believe we're going to see one that's just going to rush out there from the very beginning and tries to sort of get his dominance going?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that. I'm leaning towards the latter of what you just said, but we're prepared for everything. So we're prepared for Paulo to kind of conserve some energy, maybe at the start. We're also prepared for, obviously, for him to come out like a bat out of hell. I think, I think the general consensus is right. I think the longer the rounds go, the longer the fight goes, the more it probably favors Israel. So, that's where we'd like to take the fight. I mean, yeah, people have to understand that if you look at Israel and you look at his fights and you look at where he's done damage to people, that's all, that's timing and precision. That's putting the shot in the right place at the right time. That's what that is. That's how you knock people out with the least amount of effort. Also, but if Israel's a guy who's very strong, you can ask any of his sparring partners. If he sits down, which he doesn't often do, and hits you in the right spot, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. So Israel's prepared to. If he has to be accurate, he'll be accurate. If he has to be strong, he'll be strong. If he has to sit down a little bit and, maybe stay in one place for a little bit longer than he necessarily wants to land a bit of power, he's prepared to do that as well. So we're pretty happy that we've got all our bases covered.
I think there's this idea that Israel's going to have to stay on the outside and kind of pick Paulo apart and be very elusive. Do you think that's a bit of a myth, and that it almost sounds like Israel's happy to sort of take the fight wherever it is? I know against Robert Whittaker, he was sort of, there was a lot of moments where Israel was very close and sort of countering Robert. And also I'm wondering how you see Israel dealing with Paulo's body shots, because Paulo loves to really mix it up. He almost goes to the body as much as he goes to the head.
Let me just, without diving into it, say that everything you just said, we have a very definitive plan for each one of those scenarios.
I feel. Yeah. Sorry, go on, Coach.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to give away too much details. You can ask me about those questions all you want after the fight, but yeah, I don't want to give away too much at this stage.
I feel like whenever some people, when they talk about this fight, they try to point towards this Kelvin Gastelum fight, that epic war that, Israel Adesanya won. And I remember Israel speaking after that fight and talking about that you and him worked on a number of areas after that fight as well. I know that Vitor Belfort was talking to us about how he believes Paulo Costa has really good boxing and how he should be able to use it against Israel in this fight. I'm just wondering, what were some of those areas that you guys worked on after that Kelvin Gastelum fight? I believe Israel has looked very, very different since that fight from those kinds of perspectives.
Yeah, look, just to deal with that fight first, like, people have to understand, and being that Kelvin's a very credible threat and possibly another contender, I'm gonna just, I'm gonna hold back. Be
secret about it. The secrets.
Yeah. There was one thing in particular that Kelvin did to make that fight very successful in Kelvin's favor, which virtually no analyst or anybody else picked up. We picked it up, but that's what we do. We have to. We obviously had a vested interest to pick up what was going wrong, and we identified what that was, what Kelvin was doing exactly, and then we've made adjustments so that never happens again. The other stuff we worked on was just we worked on him like controlling the perimeter of not the ring, but the perimeter of the area that he's fighting in. So like we like to section off, we like to cut up the cage and section it off. And so like you control the whole octagon, but we section it off and we control little small areas of the cage that we like, that we have certain strategies. And we worked a lot on that, which would have, if he'd been a little bit sharper in that respect, would have helped him greatly in that fight. And it will help in the Paulo Costa fight.
Well, we've definitely seen the improvements, obviously, since that Kelvin fight. One of the things that I wanted to also ask you about, Israel has said many times that his goal is to pop Paulo Costa before USADA pops him. And in the lead up to this fight, there's been many, many times where Israel has essentially accused Paulo Costa of, doping or being on PEDs. And I remember when we spoke to you in the hotel room ahead of the Anderson fight, you sort of shared your thoughts on Anderson and it disqualifying him from any sort of GOAT status or GOAT talk. I'm wondering if it's just Israel that sort of thinks that, or if you share his, theories or concerns. Do you have your own suspicions or anything like that regarding Paulo Costa?
Look, he's never tested positive to anabolic steroids or anything illegal. So, as far as I'm concerned, there's no issue there. Anybody else, your Anderson Silvas, your TJ Dillashaw's, that's proof beyond all doubt. They've tested positive to these illegal substances. In any other sport, you're gone, you're finished. That's the end of your career. In this sport, it shouldn't be any different. In fact, it's worse because it's not cycling. You're not riding a bike next to someone. You're using a banned substance to inflict damage on someone. You shouldn't be in the sport. That's all that was my opinion, and that's all I was saying in regards to people that use drugs to cheat, like the people I mentioned. That's just the way I feel about it. Paulo Costa's he's clean as far as I'm concerned. That's something that's an Israel thing. So I definitely don't necessarily share that view. I have to have faith in USADA. If I don't have faith in them, then what are we doing here? You know what I mean?
Well, they did track down Conor McGregor on a yacht, so they're doing something right. Let's talk about before we talk about the division. When we were talking to Vitor Belfort, just quickly, Coach, he mentioned how Israel and Costa were both of the Blackzilians around 2015. Israel was helping Rumble Johnson prepare for John Jones, and Costa was helping Vitor prepare for Weidman. I'm just wondering, did they ever train together or spar together at all around that time, or is there anything that you guys were able to pick up from around that time during their time together at the Blackzilians?
To be honest, I've never, this first time I've heard of that, and Israel's never mentioned it either. So maybe they were in the same vicinity and they didn't even know each other back then. But I only remember, him being there for that fight. I remember him sparring with Vitor. I have footage of him sparring with Vitor.
Who, Israel or Paulo?
Israel.
Oh.
Israel, Vitor. I have footage of Israel sparring with Vitor, not Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that footage, imagine that footage. You got to post that one day. That would be unbelievable.
That would be, but that's just not.
That's the secret files right there.
It's not. Yeah, it's not the said thing. It's not what you do. You take those videos. Those are private videos for the fighters to work on for themselves. It's definitely not something we do. But that's the first I've heard of it. Sorry.
Okay. It's cool from a fan's perspective, just knowing that there's Israel and Vitor, a legend of the sport and current champion. That's cool. If all goes well, Eugene, and by the way, appreciate the time. We'll let you go in a moment. If all goes well, what do you think people will learn about Israel after this fight? What do you expect people's takeaways sort of to be, if this is sort of the ideal performance?
Hey, look, if you're still doubting, Israel's place in the division, if you're still doubting Israel's, place in the sport, this just helps put all those people to rest. It also puts to bed a lot of these common view that you need to be big and muscular and huge to beat someone who's skillful. Skill will always prevail, and that's the battle that we really want to prove to people, is that it's not about being tough and strong and being a big marauder that comes forward. You can beat that if you're just more skillful.
And I feel like that's a big sort of narrative, not only for Israel, but also CKB. And I guess just in life, the whole David, David versus Goliath thing. Do you think this could be a turning point in the way that people perceive Israel in terms of, being a champion, where champions have that time in their career where they're sort of the underdogs. People wonder if they can do it, and now Israel's champion. Do you think this is the turning point where if he beats Costa in definitive fashion, he'll be no longer the underdog going forward, especially with a lot of the guys coming up in the division?
I think this is the time for Israel to make a super giant step in terms of where he is and in regard to what other people think of him, the fans. And I think this is the perfect guy to do it against. There's another undefeated guy, another guy that has just blown people out of the water. This is the challenge that people want to see. This is the challenge that perhaps people thought Yoel Romero was going to give Israel, but that fight, for whatever reason, ended up the way it was. This essentially is that fight. It's time for Israel to it's funny because you say come out coming out party. Mm-hmm. This is the one where he really puts all the naysayers and doubters to the side and says this is me. I'm the best in the world and no one else can touch that.
And it doesn't hurt the fact that the division is just an absolute fire right now. You've got Jared Cannonier taking on Robert Whittaker, and you got Darren Till facing Jack Hermansson. And, we don't want to look too far ahead, but just from your perspective on those fights, if you had to sort of look at who you think ends up coming out on top and potentially being the next challenger for the belt, especially with the fact that Robert Whittaker is obviously, he lost his belt to Israel, so that's a rematch, whereas a guy like Darren Till could potentially be a huge box office fight and the first time that those two guys line up together. Do you have any sort of idea who might be the next guy out of that? I suppose it's like a mini tournament almost for the title right there.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tough one. All those guys are so good, and me as a coach, the challenge of all those guys really excites me because they're all so good and they all present a different puzzle to work out and a real challenging puzzle. In terms of the biggest, Darren Till was going to be a huge fight in the middleweight division, but unfortunately the result didn't go his way. If I'm just taking my coach's hat off and thinking of it as a promoter or a manager, which is definitely not a perspective I like to have too often. But Darren Till, but he obviously lost. Cannonier is very well deserving. Who was the other guy? Sorry.
You've got Jack Hermansson.
Hermansson is very, he's deserving. But if you take Darren Till out of that and you're just looking for the biggest fight, then it's the rematch, right?
And you guys would be cool with that rematch happening so soon?
Well, if we're looking at the biggest possible fight with the most eyes, with the most revenue for Israel, the rematch is the biggest fight amongst that group. It was obviously the Darren Till fight, but unfortunately, you couldn't fight Darren Till before you fought Robert because Robert beat him. But Robert has to get through. Is it Hermansson Robert's fighting?
Robert's fighting Cannonier.
Oh, Cannonier. Yeah. Robert obviously has to get through.
If Rob beats Cannonier and Darren beats Hermansson, you still believe Rob should get the title shot in front of Darren because, Rob beat Darren, a fight ago.
Yeah, definitely. The UFC work in mysterious ways, but you've got, if Rob beats Cannonier, then how could it make sense to give Darren the fight first? But we all know that if it makes business, it makes sense. So sometimes, there is an argument there that if Darren wins, that he may be able to jump Robert. It's like we see this all the time in the UFC. I'm just saying from my perspective, that doesn't necessarily seem like it should probably be happening. But that's not necessarily to say that it won't happen, because Darren Till, and if he wins, he could jump Robert. But it seems like if we just use common sense, that that shouldn't be the way things work out.
Yeah, of course. We'll let you go in a sec, Huge. I just wanted to mention how another typical CKB. It's essentially like a CKB pay-per-view. This one, you obviously got Israel in the main event. You got Kai Kara France. You got Brad Riddell. You got Shane Young. As always, you've got your work cut out for yourself. But I'm just wondering, on a bit of a fun side note, Eric Albarracin, who is Paulo Costa's coach, he put out a sort of bit of a camp versus camp challenge to you guys at CKB, including Israel, even Volkanovski for Henry Cejudo, and even Kai Kara France, who'll be fighting on this card. Did you see it? What did you think of that? He sort of wants to make a bit of a camp versus camp rivalry going.
Yeah, I didn't see it. Sorry, I don't. Yeah. You're talking about the little guy with the glasses?
Yeah, Eric Albarracin, correct.
He's the coach.
Yeah.
Is he the coach, or is it because he's from Brazil, but the other guy's from America, isn't he?
Well, Eric is one of the coaches. He's one of Paulo's coaches.
So he's not the head coach, though, is he?
I don't know if he's the head coach. He coaches a bunch of guys as well, like Henry Cejudo, Paulo Costa. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, I've never seen it. I don't keep up with it. But he's a bit of a character. He likes to jump in the limelight as much as a fighter. I know that because But I've got So Cam versus Cam, who's their lightweight?
Well, it's a good question. I think at the moment he's eyeing that Volko fight for Henry Cejudo. I think that's his big one.
There's not a chance.
Love it. I love it.
If Dana gives Volko a very substantial amount of money on top of what he already gets to fight Cejudo, then it'll happen. But it's not going to happen because ultimately the problem with Cejudo is he doesn't draw. That's always been the problem. So they're not going to put that extra money in there. And it's just like that fight does nothing for. What does it? Does nothing for Volk.
Yeah, Alex kind of described it as, taking a risk with no real reward. So that makes a lot of sense. Just quickly, Coach, while we're talking about the team, a lot of people have a lot of questions about Dan Hooker. Obviously, Tony Ferguson won't be fighting. It doesn't look like Dustin Poirier at UFC 254. So I'm just wondering, is Dan the guy that could slot into that fight? We know on social media he's the guy that most people have been commenting about, wanting to see him fill in for Dustin Poirier on that card.
When's that fight scheduled for?
That is
October, I want to say. I think late October.
Yeah, October's a bit early for us. Otherwise, we would jump in there straight away for sure. But if they can push it back, Dan just got off concussion protocol now, of this week. So he's only just started back training. So obviously October might be a hard push. He would do it. I would have to talk him out of it, but he would probably do it 100%. But Dan's just back now. He's getting fit again. It's good to have him back in the gym. So if they can't come to terms, if him and it sounds like they haven't come to terms, then we'll jump in there and fight Tony for sure.
Jeez. So you're saying there's a chance. All right, everybody's instantly gotten excited all over the world. Really appreciate the time, Huge. As we wrap up, Casper mentioned it before, and I just want to finish out the interview with this. I mean, you guys have done so many historical things when it comes to Australasian MMA. That, New Zealand card, the Auckland card is absolutely amazing. The Marvel Stadium show here in Melbourne was, top notch. And now you guys are going all the way over to Fight Island and, taken up most of the card with really exciting fights. You guys lived in the gym together. You're flying all over America just to get to this location. I mean, what does it mean to you as a coach? I know you've had cards where you've had 2 cards in a row, 2 big fight cards in a row, night after night with no sleep. But as a coach, what does this milestone mean to you? What does it mean to you to be able to be such a big part of this historic card come UFC 253?
And taking over the island.
Yeah, look, to have 4 guys on one card, which we've never done before, is exactly what you said. It's historic. And for me, it's like I said, when I do have a little chance to reflect on this, probably after, maybe even before, I definitely have to pinch myself. It's just, it's amazing. We keep ticking off all these little historic events that have, the UFC and MMA has been around for years, but we're only just ticking those off now. And to be a part of that, be a part of Australasian, Oceania MMA history, and to do some things for the first time and some things that will never be done again is absolutely amazing to me. Like the feeling, even though I don't reflect on it much, is one of proudness, and it humbles me.
Well, there you go, guys. It's an iconic moment, even sort of chatting to you ahead of this milestone fight. You guys won't find Eugene on social media, but make sure to follow City Kickboxing on Instagram, at Facebook, at City Kickboxing. It is Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa for the undisputed UFC middleweight title. And also you've got Kai Kara-France, you've got Shane Young, you've got Brad Riddell. It is the CKB takeover at UFC 253 on September 26th, and it will be the 27th here in Australia and New Zealand because of the time difference. Huge, we've taken up enough of your day, man. We really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Pleasure as always. Thank you very much.